I'm Alex and this is Justin, and we've taken time out of our working lives in Sydney to travel to some of Australia's most remote and beautiful places in our modified four-wheel drive, and we're filming our adventure along the way. Hello guys, welcome back to our Big Lap Essentials series. In this week's episode I'm just going to run through a more detailed budget process, what we spent so far and how I track it. I'm coming to you from a beautiful rest stop, Mary's Pool, halfway between Fitzroy Crossing and Halls Creek. Last week we did a video called 5 Simple Steps for Your Big Lap Budget, and I actually did what I think are some quite cool little pictures to represent each step, which we put in the video but then uploaded the wrong one to YouTube, so I wanted to use them now as I do a quick recap. So the 5 simple steps were: 1, what do I have? 2, cost not to forget. 3, things don't always go to plan. 4, track what you spend. And 5, how to save money on the road. In this week's episode I'm just going to bring those steps to life a bit more with a real life example. I'll dive into the spreadsheets and we'll also talk through what we've spent so far. Now this is on Apple numbers, not Excel. I'm not great with Apple numbers, I'm a bit more of a Microsoft person, but this is the laptop that we have, so that is what we're using, and I'll dive right in. So I'm just opening up the spreadsheet here and I've got a tab called the forecast expenditure, and at the top here we can see basically step 1, what do I have? So the first thing we did, and this is purely an example, was work out what we actually had to spend. So in this example we looked in our banks, and obviously we've been saving for a couple of years, but we had 65,000 in cash between us. We then worked out that we were going to get a tax rebate. Now, side note, it's really good if you're going to go traveling to straddle the tax year or go for the full calendar year, and that's because you're being taxed each month or each week as your earnings are coming out based on your annual assumed rate, and therefore if you're only going to work for half the year, and let's say you're earning 100,000, I'm now earning 50,000, and that's a very different tax bracket to what I would have been in, and therefore you're likely going to get some cash back. So we got some nice cash back in this example. We've got 2.5k, that's not the actual number. You then might do some work on the road and you might go, well, I'm going to try and do a month's worth of work, I might earn $1,000, purely hypothetical numbers. So in this example we worked out that we'd have 68.5k to play with on our big lap. Step 2 is cost not to forget. So as part of my budget process I went down and I did, so this is my actual budget underneath, all the categories of costs that I think I'm going to have on my trip. And as we said last week, there are a number of costs that people often forget in their big lap budget. For example, the top one here I've got is my phone. We've also got health insurance, storage because we have to store our things in Sydney, annual registration, Spotify, car loan, which we only had 6 months left of, your fuel, your food, your alcohol, etc. And then right at the bottom is my step 3, things don't always go to plan. So I've got a contingency category at the bottom just for some extra cash that I need to include in my budget. When I'm doing my budget, I then worked out if the cost is a fixed cost or a variable cost. And I did that because I knew that the fixed costs are going to be much easier to do my budget because I know what they are. So for example, my phone is a fixed cost. I then said I pay that monthly, so this column here is the frequency, so is it a monthly budget or an annual budget or a weekly budget. Now our Telstra, between us, we've got 2 phones, is $239 a month. Expensive, I know, but you kind of need Telstra if you're doing the big lap because you won't get much service on your Vodafone as you go around. We were planning to do our big lap for a year, so I've basically times that by 12 because my frequency is monthly. And I can see here that my annual budget is $2,868. And then I've essentially gone down and done that. So my health insurance is $439 a quarter. It's actually just gone up, and that wasn't in the budget, but I times that by 4. Registration is annual, so I've just got that once. And I've done that for all of them. in terms of my fix, and I knew what it was going to cost. My car insurance was $3,000, and that was a lot more than our previous insurance, but we upgraded to off-road insurance for this trip, so we just had peace of mind that we could be recovered wherever we are, especially when we were doing things like the Simpson. So that was $3,000. I then go on to my variable costs, and this was much harder to budget, and it really depends what it is that you're going to do. And where you're going to go, but I split them into different categories, and there was pretty much a nice round number out of the air, and we'll come on to at the end what we have actually spent. We've been a bit over on some and a bit under on others. Overall we are a tad over budget, but I'm hoping to recoup that in the NT in Northern Queensland as we go round. But for fuel I did a budget of 250, so 13 grand for a year if you're doing that. Food, I've also done 250. We do like to eat out in a country pub, so I've included those kind of eating out costs. Alcohol I put down 100 because we were going to go around some wineries, and we do like a beer in an outback pub. Accommodation 150. We can be off the grid, we don't need a powered site, so that was assuming a mixture of caravan sites and free camping. Miscellaneous is things, again this was just a nice round 100, it's things like your activities, your tours, your parks passes that we needed to go for, and car service we've done as 50. We calculated that on the fact that we probably need to service the car maybe once a month, probably 250 bucks if you're getting all the gear from Repco to do that. So in this example I'm going to spend a staggering 65,000 in the year, which is 1,254 a week. And the next thing is to make sure that that's less than what you have, which in this example it is great. We should come back with 3,000 bucks, and if not, we've got an extra 3 grand in our contingency. People do say that you can do the big lap for about $1 grand a week. I would say that's definitely possible. We have left ourselves, and because we had the cash, we have allowed ourselves to do some of the more expensive tours, stay in a few cabins, etc. where required, and go to those outback pubs. So that is setting my budget. The next thing is actually tracking it. Now I probably go a bit OTT, but I track every single expense. This is a real life example of our first 5 weeks of our trip back from last August. So I've basically got a spreadsheet with the date, description, amount, category. Now the category is a drop down box which should in theory match my forecast expenditure or budget box, so I will then say yes, that's my accommodation. Comments, I barely use them anymore, but that was at the start just if I had any comments on it, and then the week. So that allows me to track down everything that I'm doing. Now looking at it on this basis, it's really hard to visualize exactly what I'm spending on what. So I then have this weekly tab. This essentially just summarizes all the costs under each category for that week. And then I've got that compared to my budget on my left. You can see that my budget total doesn't equal my forecast expenditure, and that's just a mistake, but it's due to my car loan, I think, because that wasn't coming out the full time. So you can see here for week 1 the formula is basically adding up items on my detailed expenses tab, and in week 1 we went way over budget on food, but in week 2 we were under budget. And one of the key things is to make sure you're really looking at an average here, because you might go shopping twice in 1 week and not the next. You might have a few nights in a caravan park 1 week and all free camping the next. So really make sure you're looking at the total budget. Now in this example I didn't actually have exactly the same categories, which I wish I had have done, but I would recommend having all the categories that you've got in your forecast expenditure. But there's a few things like insurance and rego, which only happens once a year, and I didn't want to have a whole table for that. So I do that each week, but as I said, average is ideal. So over to the right I work out my total expenditure to date for each category and then the average, and we can see in this example within the first 5 weeks I am way over my expected on food. I'm under on accommodation, which is great. I'm over on fuel, under on alcohol, but there's kind of ups and downs. Now the key reasons there is insurance and rego. So you can see actually in week 5 we paid for our car insurance. That was just before we did the Simpson. So that's obviously going to increase my average versus my budget. We also had to get a whole new set of tyres and Alice springs, which I wasn't expecting in the budget, but Justin knew that we needed it at some point. We got them earlier than planned, and that obviously increased it, which is why it's also good to every now and again do a budget versus actual, where your budget or your expected expense to date versus actual. And in this example here, so I just use my forecast and I just add some columns to the right hand side. So this is an example at week 5. Now I only do this about once a month, once every 2 months. But in this, it's not just an average versus an average, it's looking at what I expected to have spent at this point. So for example, my storage, I know that I pay that every 6 months and it's not due until Feb. So I didn't expect to have paid any money in the first 5 weeks. Same with registration, it's not due until June, and health insurance wasn't due until November. But I did expect to have paid my car insurance. So I'm not expecting to pay any more of that again. So doing a more kind of detailed expected versus actual, I know that I expected to spend 9,000, but I've actually spent 10,000. So I'm just over £1,000 over budget, and that's largely due to new tyres. All the rest is kind of, there's ups and downs. So I spent way less on accommodation, which evens out my extra food and fuel. So I feel comfortable that yes, I've got new tyres and I had a contingency for that. Other than that, I'm up and down, but I'm largely on track. So that gives me some comfort at this point, which is why I like doing this kind of once a month, just to make sure, and also to take into account those costs, the timing of those larger annual, biannual, etc. costs. So that is how I track it, and then how I compare that to budget. You could just go, well, I'm halfway, so I expected to have spent this. Compare that to your bank balance, and am I roughly there? But I like to track this. And I like to track this because then I can then talk through exactly what I've spent. So I've got another spreadsheet because I do like tracking things. Which is basically a travel log. So it's, I do this on a bit of paper because we don't always have power. So I have a spreadsheet, and every day I say what is our mileage, where are we, and where have we camped. So for an example, and this is from when we got back on the road in August from Brisbane, we spent 243 nights, and I can tell you, again, I love a spreadsheet and it keeps me entertained, that 27% of those nights have been free camping, 25 is in a national park, we spent a couple with family and friends, 17% in a caravan park, etc, etc. So that's how you can see roughly how we've spent our time. Now we've spent $6,251 on accommodation so far, which is roughly 175 a week, I think I worked out. Let me just check that. 6251 divided by 243 nights times 7. So it's 180 a week, which is more than we budgeted. Now that is largely due to the fact that we had to spend 10 days in an Airbnb in Perth over Christmas, New Year, and 7 days in an Airbnb in Perth waiting for the new tent in February. So that skewed that a little bit. We've also spent 6,800 on fuel so far, but we could go on 37,500 kilometers. We've spent 5,600 on fixing the car up, so new tires, new rims, clutch slave went, suspension, leaking water pipe or something like that. So we've had to spend a lot on the car. What else have we spent? And we spent almost 10 grand on food. Not ideal, but it's good to be able to track all of those things when I do that. Now that was quite a lot of detail, and I do love a spreadsheet, but hopefully that's helped you. If you have any more questions on the spreadsheet or would like to see a copy of that, then let us know in the comments below. If you also have anything else that you want to see on this series, please let us know, as we are starting to run out of ideas. But next week we will leave the spreadsheets behind and do a few more fun things as Justin teaches us how a plumber does a service. Thanks again. If you enjoyed it, please like and subscribe.